Mihintalaya, the living monument marking the birthplace of a new civilization in the island Sri Lanka. With the coming of Thera Mahinda in the 3rd century before the Christian era, whatever arts and crafts prevailing at the time not only took a new direction, but in fact, a new tradition of arts and crafts was born. What that civilization left to us in the 3rd millennium can be seen in the water impounded in mini seas and the stupas rising to caress the clouds. Though palaces of kings would have been part of the architectural edifices of the time, only a few traces of such buildings can be seen today. Perhaps the foreign invasions and time itself may have helped in the obliteration, thus denying us even a glimpse of them. When the tooth relic of the Buddha became the symbol of sovereign power, the palace to house the repository for the tooth relic was built in close proximity to the royal palace. Looking back now over 2,500 years of a civilization, one is filled with amazement at the creativity of the architects of the civilization, the people of Lanka. Anuradhapura, the first capital of Lanka, founded by King Pandukabhaya, and the capital of a line of kings up to the 10th century. The commentaries to ancient texts say that Pandukabhaya, in planning the city, took into consideration the town planning concepts prevalent at the time. Though over 80 kings reigned at Anuradhapura, there is hardly any visible information in regard to their palaces. These stone pillars, the remnants of a building within the inner city, may perhaps be the remains of a former palace. This has the features of a storied structure, but it is difficult to say for what purpose it was used. This being the largest structural remains within the inner city and being close to Mahapali Dhanashala, the large arms house of the chronicles, the surmise of the archaeologists that it was indeed a king's palace may be true. Mahapali Shala, according to the commentaries, is the hall in the king's palace, where 1,000 monks walking in line could be fed with alms. What is seen of it is clearly only the boat-like stone receptacle for alms. The small relic house for the tooth relic to the southwest of the building, surmised as a king's palace, is an important edifice historically and architecturally. The king's palace would have been in close proximity to it. This is also the only relic house for the tooth relic that has been discovered at Anuradhapura. It appears to be a simple, charming two-storied structure made mainly of stone. Though remains of palaces are hardly to be found at Anuradhapura, there is, by the Tissavawa, in the Ranmasu Uyana, a summer palace built by the kings. The palace is built at a height and is surrounded by a moat. Ranmasu Uyana and the summer palace are both fine examples of architectural and irrigational engineering. The palace complex consists of 3 buildings. One in the center was apparently a many-storied one. The soft, cool winds blowing across Tisavava and the mild breeze wafting across the great stupa would have soothed both the bodies and minds of the kings who spent their time here. To the left of the summer palace, along the Tisavava Bund, is the Ranmasu Uyana, a fine example of a royal garden. It reveals the extraordinary creativity of the landscape artists of the time. The name Ranmasu, the legends say, is from the golden-colored fish that adorned the ponds. This is the only example of a private park in Anuradhapura. The ponds, built in perfect harmony with the natural landscape, it is said, were bathing spots of the queens. Harmony with the natural environment was a basic concept underlying Buddhist architecture and landscaping, a concept that spread with the spread of Buddhism to China and beyond. Water flowing down brick-laden channels. What is significant is that the water is not channeled through a sluice. There was a continual flow of water. The baths, which are fine examples of stonework, add to the beauty of the garden. The elephant figures of Mavallipuram in India at a later date show a close similarity to the elephant figures sculptured on the natural rock face of a pond here. Buildings have been cleverly constructed on top of rock peaks and connected by stone bridges and railings, as shown by what is left of these structures. Some of the features created within the royal garden are not seen elsewhere and provide insight into the skill of the stone craftsmen and expertise of the hydraulic engineers. Perhaps Ranmasu Uyana on the banks of the Tisavava is only second to Sigiriya as an aesthetic creation. Sigiriya, the crowning glory of a proud civilization. The capital for many centuries at Anuradhapura, by pure accident, was shifted to Sigiriya. According to the chronicles and other sources, the Prince Kashyapa, the parricide, sought sanctuary here at strategic Sigiriya and built his fortress capital. The Sigiriya complex, consisting of the magnificent buildings on the 600-foot-high rock and its precincts, the well-laid-out gardens, all testify to the skill, artistry and sensitivity of all those who were associated with its creation. It is undoubtedly a unique creation, the finest flowering of aesthetic sensibility. It would be a serious error to think that the choice of Sigiriya by Kashyapa was purely on considerations of personal safety and defensibility alone. his wonderful creative imagination and sensitivity too would have been a compelling reason for his choice. When the doyen among archaeologists, Senarat Paranavitana, says that Sigiriya may have been modelled on the citadel Alakamanda of the mythical king of wealth Kuera, the metaphor is not hyperbole. It expresses the personality of Kashyapa. The remains of the foundation, the ones that are at the top, must be those of important buildings. The topmost remains must be of a two-storied palace. Buildings taller than 2 stories at the wind-swept height would be improbable. The ground plan, covering 3.5 acres of the rock summit without violating the natural configuration, is an astounding feat. A tiered and split-level ground plan would have been covered with buildings and other appurtenances, as evidenced by the huge quantities of bricks that can be seen today. These buildings would have undoubtedly been magnificent creations of human endeavor. Those who doubt that the king lived here have to provide an explanation as to why such an amazing complex was so laid out. Buildings, gardens and pathways, and all the ornamentation and adornment. The very conceptualization of such a magnificent complex itself evokes wonderment. The wall, built along the elongated cavity in the midsection of the rock, has drawn intense attention from archaeologists and historians alike. This wall, with a highly polished surface, is aptly called the mirror wall. On this mirror wall are graffiti recording the impressions of visitors from a far distant time, as the 7th century or even earlier. Most of the deciphered graffiti provides a wealth of information of immense historical as well as sociological value. The graceful, pleasing and naturalistic paintings of Sigiriya, the earliest surviving specimens of the pictorial art of Lanka. Expressive lines in the drawings and the color, making use of light and shade, express virtuosity in their execution. According to Professor Paranavitana, the figures represent lightning and wind, Vijulata and Meghalata. To other eminent archaeologists, the figures represent the ladies of Kashyapa's court on their way to worship at the shrine at Pidurangala. Many are the interpretations, but all agree that they are, as paintings, exquisite, the finest among rock paintings anywhere in the world. Sihagiri, the Lion Rock, so named because the entrance to it was through the open mouth of a massive lion. Of the lion, only the massive paws have survived to date. These paws were discovered around 1910-1911 during excavations undertaken by H.C.P. Bell. The paws on a raised tier on the north side. Close to them, the remains of some buildings have been discovered. Sigiriya, though a rock itself, is part of a well-designed citadel with well-developed precincts extending further down the plain. Even the moats, constructed as part of its defense, were fed by this tank. The brick wall, now part of the playground of the primates who move freely here, was part of the defences of Sigiriya. The first perimeter of the defence fortification was the outer moat. Kautilya's Arthashastra mentions the importance of the moat as a defense fortification. The moats, filled with mud and man-eating crocodiles, were almost impenetrable. Though the tradition is to place the entrance to the city eastwards or northwards, here, departing from tradition, it is placed to the west, taking into account the natural layout of the land. Anyone entering from the west first encounters the moat, and beyond it, to the interior, is the wall built of stone. Beyond the wall is the fascinating complex of parks, the water park and the tiered terraced park. Kashyapa must have spent his time both at the palace, at the summit of the rock, and at the palace in the water park. The royal city of Sigiriya extends well beyond 2 kilometers from the Lion Rock. The journey searching the essence of Sri Lankan architecture. Pride of legend. A profile of the ruins of royal kingdoms. Ancient royal palaces of Sri Lanka. Sigiriya is world famous because of its unique creations. Foremost among those is the water park in the west, symmetrically laid out with its pleasing geometric patterns. Some of the features at Sigiriya are seen much later in the parks created by the Mughals and the Persians. Some of the features that were common to Chinese and Japanese landscaping were found at Sigiriya. Whatever the similarities that may be discerned, the creations of Sigiriya are the mix of features which are uniquely Sinhalese in character. In the water park is the summer house. Though similar remains are found on both wings of the park, only this is established as a summer house. The moat round the palace that does not violate the natural layout of the land is in conformity with the concepts underlying the art of landscaping at Sigiriya. A living example of hydraulic engineering skills in Kashyapa's time is seen in the fountains that come alive with the rains. One cannot for a moment imagine that this water is from the summit face of the Lion Rock. Sigiriya, standing alone today, had left much to posterity as its legacy. Though Anuradhapura became the capital again after Sigiriya ceased to be the capital, due to constant invasions across the seas, palaces, among other buildings, may have been destroyed. Yet, the traces of the palace built by Vijayabahu, who became king at Polonnaruwa, can be seen here. Though King Vijayabahu, who unified the country in the 11th century, made Polonnaruwa his capital, his consecration, it is said, was at Anuradhapura. Chronicles record that a palace was built quickly for the purpose within the inner city. The two-storied palace has huge brick walls. The mortar and color wash used on the walls can be seen even today. What is perhaps extraordinary is that this was built over 10 centuries ago. The Vijayabha Palace, with its entrance to the east and its symmetrical ground plan, may have set an example to other palaces that followed. Nevertheless, these are the oldest remains where the ground plan can be studied. Another interesting aspect is that many of the features included in it have been physically taken from other buildings. The fact that this had to be built in a hurry may have been the compelling reason. About 200 meters away is the main entranceway, the Vahalkada. It is made of bricks and stone. At Anuradhapura, the capital of a long line of kings, the only remains of a palace is this one. The palace at Panduasnuara of Parakramabahu I before becoming king at Polonnaruwa. This is also another example of a palace revealing the architectural techniques employed in the construction of palaces. Though the ground plan is similar to the Vijayabha Palace at Anuradhapura, this is larger and has complex features. The toilets in the palace are a fine example of the excellent sanitary engineering skills of the master builders of the time. Panduasnuara Palace, with its many rooms and halls, would have been a multi-storied one. The spaces left on the walls may have been for the wooden pillars that supported the upper floors. Some of the base stones, with cavities to hold the pillars upright, confirm this view. The raised platform made of bricks is reminiscent of the place where the royal seat would be in an audience hall. King Nishankamalla, who restored this place, is said to have watched command performances of song and dance seated here, according to an inscription left by him. The entranceway, the Vahalkada, to the east, is very much like similar entrances elsewhere. The boundary wall running from the entrance is built of bricks and seems to have had a roof covered with tiles. Archaeologists have also traced the foundation of a building to the southwest of the palace. This may have been the residence of the queens. Although there is no firm evidence to say this was used as a permanent royal residence, the palace complex had all the fortification of a reigning king's residence. Parakramabahu I, who became king in 1153, while undertaking the construction of water tanks and connected irrigation work for the development of the country, also built the largest of the royal residences, the 7-storied palace. The palace complex was built in close proximity to one of Parakramabahu's finest irrigation works, the Parakrama Samudra, Sea of Parakrama. Archaeologists have succeeded in clearing up the foundations of a large number of buildings within the inner city. Chroniclers compare the 7-storied palace to the abode of Shakra, the king of the gods. It was named the Vaijanta Prasada and was one of the largest of the buildings in Polonnaruwa. Though the ground plan is similar to the palaces at Panduvasnuwara and Anuradhapura, the walls are much stronger to take the weight of 7 stories. The bricks are typical of those of the Polonnaruwa period, and the thick plaster can still be seen. This is a fine example of the typical architecture of the period, and displays the quality of the technology applied in the construction. There is evidence to show that strong wooden pillars were used to support the weight of the 7 stories. This large cavity is to hold the massive pillar onto the foundation. The stone stairway is only up to the 1st floor. The stairways to the other floors may have been of wood. Chronicles speak of 1,000 rooms here at Vijayotpaya. The rooms, however, are small. There is no evidence of a palace built larger than this, even at a later date. The reign of Parakramabahu I was a prosperous one. International trade was profitable. He even extended his influence across the seas to Burma. The large palace was naturally a symbol of his power and prosperity. Although not found elsewhere before, a royal audience hall, which undoubtedly would have been part of the palace, is seen here for the first time. The audience hall was about 300 meters to the front of the palace. Some of the remains here give a fair idea of the excellent quality of the craftsmanship of the period. These ornamental pillars have been standing here for well over 900 years. In spite of the battering received from nature's onslaughts, they still show that in their day they have been magnificent specimens of the sculptor's artistic and technical skills. Not only are these elegant representations of Sinhalese art and sculpture, they also bear testimony to the affluence during the reign of Parakramabahu, rightly called the Great. This pavilion, which was used as an audience hall, is of greater architectural importance than even the palace. The moulded stylobate of the 3 tiers is 75 feet and 6 inches by 33 feet and 6 inches. On this are 4 rows of stone pillars, 12 in each row, ornamented with floral designs, shallowly carved. The lowest stylobate is ornamented with bas-relief of elephant figures. The second stylobate is decorated with conventional lions, and the third with dwarfs in different postures. This pavilion, built by one of the greatest of Sinhalese kings, is an extremely fitting monument to the skills of architects, engineers, and craftsmen in those times. Outside the walls of the palace is the stone bath, which the chronicles name the Shila Pokarni, stone pond, the sides of which, built in 3 tiers, are chastely moulded. Passages led water from the Parakrama Samudra to the baths. The entrance to the inner city of Parakramabahu. The stone inscription in front of the entrance archway, Wahalkada, to the north, is that of King Nishankamalla. It declares his right to the throne of Lanka and that he will rule in conformity with the 10 principles of good governance. The entrance to the inner city close by is well fortified with strong gateways. This entrance was of timber and had stone pillars and seems to have had a roof covering. The evidence of the reign of a great king who unified the island and ruled from a prosperous capital, Polonnaruwa, can be seen within the inner city and its environs. Polonnaruwa was the seat of a new line of Sinhalese kings, beginning with Vijayabahu I. And the tooth relic, which was in his safe custody, continued to be housed in Polonnaruwa for 100 years more, without the fear of any internal or external threats.